I was shot down on our 17th mission, and we were going to a town which was sort of north into the north of Munich, a place called Regensburg, and we were bombing aircraft factory, engine parts in aircraft factory there, and that was on the 21st of July 1944. Well, when we turned onto the target, our group turned onto the target, we were flying toward the target into the flak, and we got over the target and dropped our bombs. And as we came off the bombs, turned off of the bomb run after we dropped the bombs and turned off the target, that was when we got hit by the first flak, and that's where we lost the first engine. And we were able to get out of the area, and wasn't very long before we must have been hit by a second flight and just didn't know it. And we lost the second engine, and we flew on two engines for a while, and finally we lost the third engine, just absolutely just wore out, I think. And we were left with just one engine. And when we did that, we knew we weren't going to make it home on that because we couldn't hold altitude on one engine. So we were flying as slow as we could, and we threw everything out we could throw out to keep from being too heavy. And we got out, as I said, to the Grand Duchy of Luxembourg before we actually had to bail out. We decided that when we got down to about 5,000 feet, we'd bail the crew out with parachutes so that we wouldn't all be landing in one spot and everybody get caught at one time. All 10 of us got out of the airplane. 4 of them were captured by the Germans, and 6 of us got away individually, not with each other, but individually. And we worked our way back through the underground, and we were called evadis. That used to wear a little boot that said, "You ride in and walk out." So everybody went out in a little different area. I happened to have gone out through the bomb bays. I came up out of the nose to standing behind the pilot, and when it was my turn to go, I went and walked the catwalk back to we opened, I had already opened the bomb bay doors, and I just dived, I just took a dive out of the bomb bays into space, and got clear of the airplane, pulled the ripcord, and parachute open, fortunately, and I got down. I landed in a forest in the tops of a tree, or some trees, rather large trees, and I kind of wanted to come into that area on purpose because you could hide. But secondly, when I came into the trees, I could grab hold of the limbs and break my fall. But I broke my ankle in the process of doing that, but it was all right. But I got down, when I got down and was in the tree, then I could hear all kinds of things going on down on the ground. Dogs were barking, and people were yelling, and guns were shooting, and everything else. But they didn't see me, and I got down got off out of the parachute and got down on the ground, and as I said, it was in the middle of the day, and I knew my ankle was really giving me a fit, but I was kind of struggling to get back to the edge of a field to get a feeling for where I was and what was going on. And within a half an hour, I looked behind me, and there was a guy coming on a bicycle. And he came over and spoke to me in English, and he said, he asked me if I'd been on that airplane. I said, yes. And he said, would you like to try to get away? And I said, sure. And so he took me deeper down into the forest somewhere, and really had to struggle with that ankle getting down in there, but quite a ways away from where I really bailed out. And he hid me down in the woods, and he said, okay, I'm going to go now, but I'll come back later in the day, which he did. And the first thing he gave me when he came back was a bottle of wine and some cheese and some crackers. And the first thing he asked me was, did I have any cigarettes? So I gave him a package of Camels that I had in my pocket. And then we talked for a while, and then he left and said he'd be back in the middle of the night. They were making arrangements as to where they were going to take me. So later in that night, in the middle of the night, he came back, and with a predetermined signal that he had left me with, we got together, and he took me into the little town in Luxembourg called Edelbrook. And when I did that, he took me into this house. It was all dark when I went there, but obviously he had curtains on the inside of the house were all closed. But when I went into the house, there must have been 10 or 15 people in there waiting for me to come. And the first thing they did was to fix me a nice breakfast. And that was probably 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning, And I stayed with that particular family for a couple of weeks. Well, I moved from there to another place later on, a couple of weeks after I got there, with another person. I stayed with his family. And then finally, they moved me across the country over toward the Belgian border in a little town called Rombrew. First town was Edelbrook, and I went to the last town I was in was at Rombrew, which is pretty close to the Belgian border to the west of the Grand Duchy of Luxembourg. And I stayed with them for several weeks. Well, it's been longer than that, about 6 weeks, I guess. And I really had a really good family to be with, because they really took great care of me. They fed me. They had a good hiding place for me. They knew exactly what to do and what not to do, and they were very, very intelligent. Although I knew and they knew that if the Germans caught them, they were dead meat. And maybe I was too, but they were for sure. When I was moving from Edelbrook over to Rombrew, which is probably about 30, 40 miles across country toward Belgium, the Germans were meeting in Edelbrook. It was on a Sunday. And they decided that they wanted to move me out of there, because that's why I moved from the first place to the second place, because they were searching for all where the crew members were. So we had to get out of that area. But anyway, the Germans were having a big meeting there in Edelbrook on that Sunday. So they went down to where the Germans were meeting, and they stole a German bicycle and brought it to me, and then they had arranged the whole scenario of how I was going to be moved from Edelbrook to Rombrew, which is, I said, like 40 miles apart. And I'm telling you, these people really knew how to do things, because they knew if they didn't do it right, they'd get killed probably for it. And they got me across country, and we even stopped and ate dinner in a bar up in a mountain someplace. And finally got into Rombrew, and the people there were waiting for me, and so they were tremendous. I mean, they were very capable of doing what they did. They knew how to deal with, and they knew the risks that they were taking, and as a result of that, they tried to do everything they could to reduce the risk. So, well, I was sitting in Rombrew when they were all Germans were all around me. German army was all around me, and I didn't go out when they were there at all. But when they were all trying to run back to Germany, they were retreating in front of the American troops and the British troops. It wasn't very much of a danger to me then, because one afternoon I was sitting downstairs. I'd come downstairs from my room upstairs, downstairs in like a little den, a little sitting room, and one of the German officers came walking in, and he didn't pay attention to me. He wasn't interested in me. He knew I was a Luxembourg, you know. I didn't look any different than they did. And the last day I was there, a P-47 fighter airplane crashed in a field outside of the town, and they thought the pilot was dead, and they wanted me to go out there and try to do whatever I could do to get him out of the airplane. So I went out there, got him out of the airplane, searched his pockets, and he was dead, and searched his pockets and what he had in the airplane with him to get as much of the effects as I could still send home. And then they brought out a casket, and they put him in a casket, and they had an American flag that they had made, and they put it across the casket, and they walked him into town to the church in town. And everybody saluted him as he went down the main street into the town. He was dead. He was from Ohio, by the way, Lakewood, Ohio. His name was Parmalee. I still remember his name, Roy Parmalee. And I never met his wife, although I did send his things back to the War Department. But the reason that she didn't get to meet his wife or his family, because there were so many people doing strange things. You know, they didn't want people to approach the people like the family, the mothers or the wives, the children, because there were a lot of con artists out there sometimes, you know, and so they didn't. I sent the stuff back to the Army, and they sent it to him, and I eventually got a note from her thanking me for it, you know. But then after that, people came over from the Army. They had heard that the plane had crashed there, so they came looking for him, but he was already dead, so they arranged to get his body, but they found me too, see, so they told me that I should go with them also, so that was when I left. Now, that was the funny part of that deal was they had planned a big party for me that night, because I was the first time I'd been out in the open where people could know I was there. And yet when they came to pick up this guy, they made me go with them back to the Army. And they wanted to make sure that, that I was back under control of the Army. Well, I didn't get my party, so I didn't have my party after all of that. Finally, I got an airplane ride from Paris back to England and went back up to my group. But I couldn't fly anymore, but we did go up and check out an airplane and take a flight. They didn't want to take any chances on compromising the people that had helped us. Okay. So when we came back, we couldn't fly anymore. In fact, they didn't send us overseas anymore at all. They brought me back, and I went back and went to Texas and Louisiana and finally to Langley, and I was flying training missions at Langley. And then finally got out there after the Japanese lost in August of 1945. Then I got out of the Army and up to Fort Meade and got out and went home, went back to school. Right now, the people that were there and the people that helped me, is almost nobody left. They're almost all dead now. Now, in 1992, my wife and I were in Europe, and I rented a car in Brussels. So I drove right into Rombrew, and I drove right to the same house that I'd been staying in. And there was a business attached to the house, which was in the construction business, materials business. And the sign over the door of that business was still there, except that the man's name, Clarin Rodesh, had been changed to the successor, which was Hoffman, which turns out was the husband of one of the daughters. Okay, he had married, he had taken over the business. Okay, but I walked into there and I went into the business, and there was nobody in there. But I knew the door that went to the house. I knocked on the door of the house. And when I went in to the door, and the lady came to the door, and I told her who I was. I was Ordway Gates, and I'd been there during World War II, and I was trying to determine whether or not anybody in the family was still in that area. And I said, particularly, I'm trying to see if either Maria or Yvonne are still. They were the youngest two sisters. And she said, I am Yvonne.